Nothing cuts deeper than watching someone you love hurt by someone you trust. For Malcolm Price, a successful CEO who built his empire on respect, that moment came when he walked through his front door. Malcolm spent decades climbing from nothing to everything, putting family first. But when a cancelled trip brought him home early, he discovered his wife shouting at his aging mother, who trembled with her cane. The scene shattered everything he knew. Instead of exploding in anger, Malcolm did something unexpected. He made a quiet decision that would change everything: his marriage, his legacy, and his understanding of true strength. What happens when a man who conquered the business world faces his greatest challenge at home? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Malcolm Price stood 52 stories above downtown Atlanta, gazing through floor-to-ceiling windows at the city sprawling beneath him. The corner office of Price Industries commanded a view that never failed to remind him how far he'd traveled from the cramped apartment where he'd grown up. On his mahogany desk sat a silver-framed photograph, himself at 45, his arm around a radiant Catherine, his mother Rosa beaming beside them at their 10th anniversary celebration. The image captured a time when everything seemed perfectly aligned, when success felt complete. That photograph told a story Malcolm cherished, the self-made man who'd built an empire without forgetting where he came from. Price Industries had grown from a small construction company into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate under his leadership. Hospitals, schools, affordable housing projects, Malcolm's buildings dotted the southeastern landscape, each one carrying his signature commitment to quality and community service. His journey began in the same neighborhood where his mother still attended church every Sunday. Rosa Price had cleaned office buildings at night while raising Malcolm alone after his father died of a heart attack at 38. She'd worn her fingers raw, scrubbing floors, so Malcolm could attend college on partial scholarships, working 3 jobs to cover what financial aid couldn't touch. Even now, successful beyond his wildest childhood dreams, Malcolm could hear her voice echoing through his memory. Success without character is just noise, baby. Build something that matters. The philosophy had guided every major decision. When competitors cut corners, Malcolm insisted on superior materials. When market downturns tempted massive layoffs, he found creative alternatives to preserve jobs. His reputation for integrity preceded him into every boardroom, earning respect that money alone could never purchase. Employees stayed with Price Industries for decades, creating a culture of loyalty rare in corporate America. Catherine had entered his life during one of his company's most ambitious expansion phases. He'd met her at a charity gala, elegant, sophisticated, everything his younger self had imagined success would attract. She moved through high society with grace that Malcolm, despite his wealth, still felt he was learning. Her family had old money, connections, and the kind of social polish that complemented his business acumen perfectly. Their courtship unfolded like something from a romance novel. Catherine appreciated Malcolm's drive, his values, the way he spoke about building something meaningful rather than simply accumulating wealth. She listened with genuine interest when he described his vision for affordable housing projects, nodded approvingly when he insisted on hiring from local communities. Her support felt like validation that he'd truly made it, not just financially, but socially, culturally. The wedding had been spectacular, covered by Atlanta's society pages. Catherine wore her grandmother's pearls, and a dress that cost more than Malcolm's mother had earned in her best year. Rosa had looked proud but slightly overwhelmed, clasping Malcolm's hand during the ceremony, with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Your daddy would be so proud," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Those early years of marriage sparkled with possibility. Catherine threw dinner parties that brought together business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists. She transformed their Buckhead mansion into a showcase that appeared in architectural magazines. Malcolm appreciated how she elevated his social standing, opening doors that remained closed to even wealthy men without proper connections. Catherine's ambition complemented his own. She served on museum boards, organized charity auctions, and cultivated relationships with Atlanta's most influential families. Her efforts enhanced Malcolm's business prospects while fulfilling her own need for recognition and status. They seemed perfectly matched, his substance providing the foundation for her style, her connections amplifying his influence. Rosa had initially struggled to find her place in their expanding world. The transition from her modest apartment to the mansion's guest wing felt overwhelming despite Malcolm's gentle encouragement. Catherine had been patient those first years, including Rosa in family gatherings, asking about her church activities, even driving her to medical appointments when Malcolm traveled for business. But subtle changes began creeping into their dynamic as time passed. Catherine's responses to Rosa's stories grew shorter, her smiles more forced. She started scheduling social events when Rosa might want family time, claiming the conflicts were unavoidable. Malcolm noticed, but attributed the tension to normal adjustment challenges. Successful marriages required compromise from everyone. Rosa never complained directly, but Malcolm caught glimpses of her discomfort. She'd retreat to her room earlier during dinner parties, claim headaches when Catherine suggested shopping trips, spend increasing hours at her church or visiting old friends from the neighborhood. Malcolm assumed she was simply more comfortable with familiar routines, not recognizing the signs of someone feeling unwelcome in what should have been her home. Catherine's social calendar had expanded dramatically over their 12 years together. She chaired multiple committees, organized exclusive fundraisers, and maintained friendships with women whose husbands controlled significant economic and political influence. Malcolm admired her dedication, while occasionally feeling exhausted by the constant entertaining their lifestyle demanded. Their Buckhead estate reflected Catherine's sophisticated tastes: marble floors imported from Italy, artwork acquired through exclusive galleries, furniture that appeared in design magazines. Every room showcased Catherine's eye for beauty and luxury, creating spaces that impressed visitors and reinforced their status among Atlanta's elite. Malcolm appreciated the elegance, while sometimes missing the comfort of simpler surroundings. The photograph on Malcolm's desk captured their family during what now seemed like a golden period. Catherine's smile appeared genuine, Rosa looked truly comfortable, and Malcolm himself radiated the satisfaction of a man who'd achieved his dreams. The image served as a daily reminder of what he was working to preserve and protect. Rosa had aged considerably over the past year. A minor stroke had left her requiring a cane for stability, and her doctor recommended against living alone. Malcolm hadn't hesitated to bring her into the main house permanently, converting the downstairs study into a comfortable bedroom suite. Catherine had agreed readily, expressing concern for Rosa's welfare and praising Malcolm's devotion to family. The arrangement should have worked smoothly. Rosa was quiet, independent, and grateful. She helped with small household tasks when her strength permitted, never demanded attention or special accommodations. Her presence added warmth to the elegant house, reminders of family history and simpler times when love mattered more than luxury. Malcolm's business required frequent travel, domestic and international deals that could extend trips for days or weeks. He'd built trusted teams to handle operations in his absence, but major negotiations still demanded his personal involvement. Catherine had always supported these professional necessities, understanding that Malcolm's success required sacrifice from both of them. His most recent trip to London was supposed to last 10 days, penalizing a partnership with a European construction firm. Malcolm had called Rosa every evening, their conversations a cherished routine that connected him to home regardless of time zones. She'd sounded tired lately, but he attributed that to her ongoing health challenges rather than any specific concern. The London deal had collapsed unexpectedly when the European partners revealed financial irregularities that made partnership impossible. Malcolm's legal team advised immediate withdrawal from negotiations, leaving him with several unplanned days before his scheduled return. Rather than extending his stay for tourism or additional meetings, he'd chosen to fly home early. Family time seemed more valuable than business networking, landing at Hartsfield-Jackson on a Tuesday afternoon instead of Thursday evening. Malcolm felt excited about surprising both Catherine and Rosa. He'd stopped at Rosa's favorite bakery for the coconut cake she loved, imagining her delight at his unexpected return. The house would be quiet, peaceful, exactly what he needed after the stress of failed negotiations. His key turned silently in the front door lock, the same key that had symbolized home and security for over a decade. The marble foyer stretched ahead, afternoon sunlight streaming through cathedral windows. Malcolm set down his luggage carefully, not wanting to announce his arrival just yet. The element of surprise would make his homecoming even more special. That was when he heard Catherine's voice, sharp and cruel, cutting through the mansion's usual serenity like a blade through silk. "You think I don't see what you're doing, Rosa? Playing the helpless old woman so Malcolm feels guilty about leaving you here." Malcolm froze in the foyer, Catherine's voice slicing through the afternoon stillness with a venom he'd never heard before. The bakery box slipped from his hands, landing silently on the marble floor as he strained to process what he was hearing. "Catherine, please," came Rosa's gentle voice, barely audible. "I'm just trying to what? Make me look like the villain because I have a life outside this house." Catherine's voice grew sharper, more cutting. "You sit in that chair all day, waiting for him to call, making sure everyone knows how much you sacrifice for this family. It's pathetic." Malcolm's body moved without conscious thought, drawn toward the living room where the voices originated. He pressed himself against the doorframe, remaining hidden while his world tilted on its axis. Through the gap, he could see Catherine pacing like a predator, her elegant frame rigid with fury. Rosa sat in her favorite armchair, the antique piece Malcolm had specially positioned near the window so she could watch the garden. Her weathered hands gripped her cane, not the utilitarian medical device her doctor had prescribed, but the beautiful carved wooden piece Malcolm had commissioned from a local artisan. The cane had been a symbol of dignity, allowing Rosa to maintain her independence with grace. Now it seemed like a shield, protection against an attack she'd never anticipated. "I never asked for anything," Rosa said quietly, her voice carrying the measured tone she'd used throughout Malcolm's childhood, when neighbors complained about noise or landlords threatened eviction. "I stay out of your way." "I help when I can." Catherine whirled around, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light. "Help? You call shuffling around in your robe until noon helping? You call making that woman feel obligated to cook separate meals because you can't eat fancy food helping?" Malcolm watched his mother's shoulders sag slightly, the cane trembling in her grip. Rosa had always been proud of her simple tastes, her appreciation for the foods she'd grown up with. Malcolm loved that about her, the way she found joy in cornbread and collard greens, the way her face lit up when he joined her for Sunday dinner at her old kitchen table. "Now set up in the mansion's breakfast nook. I cook for myself most times," Rosa replied, her dignity intact despite the assault. "I don't want to be trouble." "Trouble?" Catherine laughed, the sound bitter and ugly. "Rosa, you are trouble. Do you think Malcolm's friends want to come to dinner parties and small talk with someone who still thinks Red Lobster is fine dining? Do you think the wives in my circle want to hear stories about your church bingo games?" Each word hit Malcolm like a physical blow. He'd never heard Catherine speak with such cruelty, such calculated malice. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd thought shared his values about family and respect, was systematically destroying his mother's sense of worth and belonging. Rosa's hand moved to her chest, just over her heart, a gesture Malcolm remembered from his childhood when stress would trigger her anxiety. She'd developed the habit after Malcolm's father died, a physical response to emotional pain that she'd tried to hide from her young son. Seeing it now, directed at her own treatment in what should have been a sanctuary, made Malcolm's vision blur with rage. "I know I'm different from your friends," Rosa said, her voice growing smaller. "I know I don't fit in with your fancy life. But Malcolm wanted me here. He said this was my home too. Malcolm says a lot of things, Catherine snapped. He's got this romantic notion about family loyalty that he picked up from you, actually. All that honor your mother nonsense. It's holding him back, Rosa. Holding us back. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists, his breathing shallow and rapid. Catherine wasn't just attacking Rosa. She was attacking the foundation of everything he believed, everything he'd built his life upon. The values Rosa had instilled in him weren't romantic notions. They were the bedrock of his character, the source of his integrity. When he was little, Rosa said softly, seeming to speak more to herself than to Catherine, after his daddy died, Malcolm used to have nightmares. He'd wake up crying, asking if I was going to die too and leave him all alone. I'd hold him and promise that families stick together, that we take care of each other no matter what. Catherine's expression grew even colder. Well, he's not a scared little boy anymore, Rosa. He's a grown man with responsibilities that extend far beyond your emotional needs. He has a wife who's helped him build connections he never could have managed on his own. He has a social position that requires certain standards. I never asked him to choose, Rosa whispered, tears now flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. I just wanted to be close to him while I still can. I won't be here forever, Catherine. Surely you can understand that. The sight of his mother's tears broke something fundamental inside Malcolm. Rosa had cried exactly twice in his memory, at his father's funeral, and at Malcolm's college graduation when pride overwhelmed her composure. She was the strongest person he'd ever known, a woman who'd worked multiple jobs, faced discrimination, and raised a son alone while never losing her dignity or faith. To see her reduced to tears by someone living in the home her sacrifices had made possible felt like witnessing a desecration. Oh, I understand perfectly, Catherine said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You want to guilt Malcolm into choosing between his past and his future. You want him to feel responsible for your happiness, your health, your entertainment. It's emotional manipulation, Rosa, and it's working. Rosa looked up sharply, her tears stopping as if shocked by the accusation. That's not, I would never, please, Catherine interrupted. The way you light up when he calls. The way you save up little stories and problems to share with him. The way you make sure he sees how frail you're getting, how much you need him. You're playing on his guilt about your sacrifices, and it's incredibly selfish. Malcolm watched his mother's face crumble, watched her absorb the poisonous suggestion that her love for her son was actually manipulation. Rosa had never been manipulative. She was the most straightforward, honest person he'd ever known. Her joy in his calls came from genuine love. Her stories from a desire to connect. Her needs from real vulnerability, not calculated schemes. Catherine moved closer to Rosa's chair, towering over the older woman like a predator closing in for the kill. Here's what's going to happen, Rosa. You're going to stop making Malcolm feel guilty about his success. You're going to stop acting like some kind of martyred saint who gave up everything for her ungrateful son. And you're going to start acting like you belong in this house instead of some charity case we're obligated to support. Rosa's grip on her cane tightened, her knuckles white with effort. The carved wood, a symbol of dignity and independence, now seemed like her only anchor in a storm of cruelty she'd never anticipated facing. I belong here because Malcolm is my son, Rosa said quietly, her voice gathering strength. Because I raised him to be the man you married. Because I loved him when he had nothing, and nobody thought he'd amount to anything. That's not manipulation, Catherine. That's just love. Catherine's face twisted with disgust. Love, Rosa, love doesn't make demands. Love doesn't require guilt. Love certainly doesn't expect a successful man to compromise his future for the sake of his past. Malcolm had heard enough. His body trembled with rage, with disbelief, with the crushing realization that the woman he'd shared his bed and his dreams with for 12 years had been harboring this level of contempt for everything he held sacred. But instead of storming into the room, instead of confronting Catherine in the heat of his fury, Malcolm made a different choice. He stepped backward, Away from the doorway, his business mind already calculating, planning, strategizing. Catherine had revealed her true nature, shown him exactly who she was when she thought no one was watching. This wasn't a moment for emotional reactions. It was a moment for careful, deliberate action. Malcolm Price had built his empire by thinking 3 moves ahead, by gathering intelligence before making decisive strikes. The woman in his living room had just declared war on everything he valued most. She had no idea who she was fighting. Malcolm retreated to his study, closing the door with the same careful precision he used in hostile corporate negotiations. His hands still shook with suppressed rage, but his mind had shifted into analytical mode. Catherine's performance would continue upstairs. He could hear her voice returning to its normal, warm register as she presumably helped Rosa to her room, playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law. 3 hours later, Catherine greeted Malcolm's return with perfectly executed surprise and delight. She kissed his cheek, asked about London, and expressed sympathy about the failed deal. Her performance was flawless, concerned wife welcoming her husband home early, no trace of the venom he'd witnessed that afternoon. "How's Mama?" Malcolm asked, watching Catherine's face carefully. "Oh, she's been a little tired today," Catherine replied smoothly. "I think the weather change is affecting her joints. She had a small dizzy spell this afternoon, but she's resting now." The lie rolled off Catherine's tongue like silk, reframing Rosa's emotional devastation as physical weakness. Malcolm nodded, filing away this first piece of evidence in what he now understood would be a larger investigation. The next morning, Malcolm rose early and found Maria, their longtime housekeeper, preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Maria had worked for wealthy families for 30 years before joining the Price household 5 years ago. Her discretion and professionalism were unquestionable, but Malcolm sensed she might have observations worth hearing. "Maria, how has my mother been settling in since her stroke?" he asked casually, pouring coffee. Maria's hands paused over the eggs she was scrambling. "Mr. Price, your mother is a lovely lady. Very kind, very respectful. But," Malcolm prompted gently. Maria glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "She seems sad sometimes. More sad than when she first moved in. I hear her crying at night sometimes." "Crying!" Malcolm's coffee cup clinked against the saucer. "She tries to be quiet about it, always apologizing when I bring her meals, asking if she's causing trouble. Yesterday she asked if Mrs. Price seemed upset about something she did wrong." Malcolm's chest tightened. "What did you tell her?" "I told her she was being silly, that everyone loves having her here." "But Mr. Price—" Maria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with gossip. "Please, Maria, if something's wrong, I need to know. Your mother keeps asking if she should find somewhere else to live. She says maybe she's too much trouble for a house like this." After breakfast, Malcolm sought out James, their groundskeeper and part-time driver. James had served in the army before transitioning to civilian work, and his straightforward manner had always earned Malcolm's trust. "James, I wanted to check on how my mother's been doing. Any concerns I should know about?" James was pruning roses near Rosa's window. "Your mom's a real lady, Mr. Price. Always thanks me for driving her to church. Never complains about anything." "That sounds like her," but James paused. "She's been asking me to take her looking at senior living places. Says she wants to explore her options, not be dependent on family." Malcolm's stomach dropped. Rosa had never mentioned senior living facilities to him. "When did this start?" "Maybe 6 weeks ago. She made me promise not to bother you with it, said you had enough on your mind with work." That evening, Malcolm gently approached Rosa in her sitting area. She was going through a small wooden box that he recognized from his childhood. Her recipe collection, handwritten cards stained with decades of cooking experiences. "What are you working on, Mama?" Rosa looked up, her eyes brightening as they always did when she saw him. "Just organizing some old things. Thought maybe I'd write down some of your daddy's favorite recipes properly so they don't get lost." Malcolm sat beside her, picking up one of the cards. His father's favorite cornbread, written in Rosa's careful cursive with notes added over the years. "Add extra honey when Malcolm's sick. Double batch for church potluck. These are treasures." "Mama, your wife mentioned she might want to learn some traditional family recipes." Rosa said softly. Thought I'd get them organized in case she was interested. Malcolm studied his mother's face. Catherine said that? Well, she asked about this old box once. Said it was charming how I kept everything handwritten. Rosa's voice carried hope, mixed with uncertainty. I thought maybe she was hinting that she'd like to learn. Catherine had never shown interest in cooking, much less traditional southern recipes. Malcolm suspected she'd mentioned the box with entirely different intentions, possibly mockery disguised as curiosity. Has Catherine been helpful since you moved in permanently? Oh, yes, Rosa said quickly, too quickly. She's very busy, of course, with all her important work. I try not to bother her. You're not a bother, Mama. This is your home. Rosa's smile wavered slightly. I know you mean that, baby. But Catherine has her own way of running things, and I respect that. She's built a beautiful life for you. Over the following days, Malcolm made subtle inquiries with other staff members. The pattern that emerged painted a disturbing picture. Catherine's treatment of Rosa shifted dramatically based on Malcolm's presence. When he was home, Catherine played the role of attentive daughter-in-law. When he was away, her patience vanished entirely. Thomas, their evening security guard, mentioned seeing Rosa walking the gardens late at night, seeming restless and upset. Sarah, the part-time cleaning lady, noted that Rosa had started doing her own laundry, claiming she didn't want to create extra work for anyone. Mrs. Henderson from the catering company mentioned that Rosa had quietly asked if her dietary restrictions were causing problems for dinner parties, that each revelation built a clearer picture of systematic psychological erosion. Catherine wasn't just neglecting Rosa. She was actively undermining the older woman's sense of belonging and worth. The cruelty Malcolm had witnessed wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a sustained campaign designed to make Rosa feel unwelcome in her own son's home. Malcolm's investigation led him to Henry Morrison, his longtime mentor and former business partner. Henry had built his own construction empire from nothing, and his wisdom had guided Malcolm through countless challenging decisions. Now in his 70s, Henry possessed the kind of perspective that came from weathering decades of complex business and personal challenges. Henry, I need advice about a delicate situation, Malcolm said, as they shared lunch at Henry's club. Personal or professional? Personal, family, Henry nodded slowly. Those are often the hardest problems to solve. What's troubling you? Malcolm chose his words carefully, describing the situation without naming Catherine directly. Henry listened without interruption, his weathered face growing more serious as the story unfolded. Son, you're describing psychological abuse, Henry said finally. Subtle, calculated, but abuse nonetheless. The question is, what are you prepared to do about it? I want to fix it. Save my marriage and protect my mother. Sometimes those goals are mutually exclusive, Henry replied gently. Sometimes a person shows you who they really are, and you have to decide whether you can live with that truth. That evening, Malcolm sat in his study reviewing the evidence he'd collected. Catherine's behavior wasn't random cruelty. It was strategic manipulation designed to drive Rosa away while maintaining plausible deniability. She was systematically destroying his mother's spirit while presenting herself as the supportive wife dealing with a difficult situation. Malcolm opened his laptop and began documenting everything. Dates, witnesses, specific incidents. His business training had taught him to build comprehensive cases before taking action. If confrontation became necessary, he would be prepared. But first, he would try the diplomatic approach. Give Catherine an opportunity to acknowledge the problem and change her behavior. Marriage was supposed to involve trust, communication, and mutual respect. Perhaps Catherine didn't realize how destructive her actions had become. Looking at Rosa's recipe box sitting on his desk, Malcolm felt the weight of family history and responsibility. These recipes represented generations of love, sacrifice, and tradition. They deserve protection, just like the woman who'd preserved them through decades of hardship. Catherine had declared war on his values, his history, and his heart. Malcolm Price was about to discover exactly what his wife was willing to sacrifice for the life she wanted to maintain. Malcolm chose a quiet Saturday evening to approach Catherine. After Rosa had retired early with the book, Catherine was in their bedroom, seated at her antique vanity, removing her jewelry with practiced elegance. The ritual had once charmed him, watching his sophisticated wife transition from public figure to private person. Tonight, the performance felt calculated, artificial. "Catherine, I wanted to talk with you about Mama." Her hands paused on her pearl earrings, meeting his eyes in the mirror's reflection. "Of course. How can I help?" Malcolm sat on the edge of their bed, his wedding ring catching the lamplight. The band had worn smooth over 12 years of marriage, a symbol of promises made before God and family. "I've noticed she seems more withdrawn lately." "Less comfortable here?" Catherine turned to face him, her expression shifting to concerned sympathy. "I've noticed that too, actually. I think the adjustment has been harder than she expected. Living with adult children isn't easy for someone who's been independent. She lived independently because she had to, not because she preferred it. Family was always her priority. I understand that, Malcolm. I really do." Catherine moved to sit beside him, placing her hand over his. "But sometimes what people say they want and what actually makes them happy are different things. Your mother might feel obligated to seem grateful while actually feeling displaced." Malcolm studied his wife's face, searching for cracks in her performance. "Displaced how?" "Think about it from her perspective," Catherine said, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used in committee meetings. "She spent her whole adult life being the most important woman in your life. Now suddenly there's another woman, your wife, in that position. It creates natural tension." The deflection was skillful, reframing Catherine's cruelty as Rosa's jealousy. "My mother has never competed for my affection, Catherine. She taught me to honor my wife, to put my marriage first. I know she did, consciously. But unconscious feelings are more complex." Catherine's hand moved to his wedding ring, turning it gently on his finger. "Have you considered that she might be happier in a senior community? Somewhere she could build friendships with peers, participate in activities designed for her interests." "You mean somewhere she wouldn't be underfoot?" Catherine's eyes flashed briefly before resuming their sympathetic expression. "Malcolm, I never said anything about her being underfoot. I'm trying to think about what's best for everyone, including your mother. What's best for Rosa is being with family who love and respect her. Of course it is, and she has that. But maybe she'd also benefit from independence, dignity, her own space, where she doesn't have to worry about fitting into our lifestyle." Malcolm felt his temper rising but kept his voice level. "Our lifestyle? Catherine, this house is big enough for 10 families. Rosa takes up one room and asks for nothing. It's not about physical space, honey." Catherine's voice grew more patient, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "It's about social space, generational differences, comfort levels. When we entertain, Rosa feels awkward. When we travel, she worries about being left alone. When we make decisions about the house or our schedule, we have to consider her needs. She's my mother." "Of course we consider her needs," Catherine sighed, a sound that suggested his attachment to Rosa was touching but impractical. "Malcolm, you have such a beautiful heart. Your loyalty to your mother is one of the things I fell in love with. But sometimes loyalty can become—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Limiting." The word hit him like a slap. "Limiting? I don't mean that harshly. I mean that your sense of obligation might be preventing you from seeing what's actually best for everyone involved, including your mother." Malcolm stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden, where Rosa often sat reading in the afternoons. "Catherine, I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you been making Mama feel unwelcome here?" "What?" Catherine's voice carried perfect shock, perfect hurt. "Malcolm, how could you ask me that? I've done everything I can to make your mother comfortable. I rearranged the entire downstairs to accommodate her needs. I've included her in our social events even when it's awkward. I've never once complained about the changes her presence has required." "I didn't say you complained. I asked if you'd made her feel unwelcome." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, another practiced performance. "It breaks my heart that you'd even think such a thing. I've tried so hard to balance everyone's needs, to be supportive of your decision to bring her here permanently." If your mother feels unwelcome, it certainly isn't because of anything I've done intentionally. The key word was intentionally, Malcolm noted. Catherine was leaving herself room to explain away any specific incidents as misunderstandings or unintended slights. She's been asking staff about senior living facilities. She has? Catherine's surprise seemed genuine, though Malcolm couldn't be sure. Maybe she's starting to realize that she'd prefer more independence. That's actually healthy, Malcolm. It shows she's thinking about her own happiness rather than just doing what she thinks you want. Or maybe she's feeling pushed toward that decision. Catherine stood, moving closer to him, with the graceful steps of a woman accustomed to managing difficult conversations. Malcolm, I understand that you're protective of your mother. It's one of your most admirable qualities, but you can't protect her from the natural process of aging and changing needs. I'm not trying to protect her from aging. I'm trying to protect her from feeling abandoned by her own family. Abandoned. Catherine's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. How is encouraging her independence abandoning her? How is wanting her to be happy abandoning her? Malcolm turned to face her fully. Catherine, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Have you said or done anything that might have made my mother feel like she's not wanted here? Catherine met his eyes steadily, her expression hurt but resolute. Malcolm, I have never intentionally made your mother feel unwanted. I've tried to include her, support her, and respect her place in your life. If she's feeling uncomfortable, it's not because of any deliberate action on my part. The answer was carefully constructed, true in the narrowest technical sense, while completely missing the larger truth. Catherine hadn't technically said Rosa wasn't wanted. She'd simply made it clear that her presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. I need you to make more of an effort, Malcolm said finally. Whatever's causing this distance, I need you to help bridge it. Of course, Catherine replied immediately. I want your mother to be happy here. I want our family to work. But her quick agreement felt hollow, another performance designed to end an uncomfortable conversation rather than address the underlying problem. Malcolm sensed that pushing further would only drive Catherine deeper into defensive manipulation. That night, as Catherine slept beside him, Malcolm stared at the ceiling, thinking about promises and expectations. His wedding vows had included commitments to honor and cherish, to love in sickness and health, for better or worse. He'd taken those promises seriously, building his marriage on foundations of trust and mutual respect. But what happened when you discovered that your spouse's interpretation of those vows was fundamentally different from your own? What happened when the person you'd committed to love and honor showed contempt for the values that defined you? Malcolm twisted his wedding ring around his finger, feeling the smooth gold that had once symbolized unbreakable connection. The ring still fit perfectly, but the marriage it represented felt increasingly foreign. He'd married a woman who shared his dreams and values. He was living with someone who saw his deepest principles as obstacles to overcome. The diplomatic approach had failed. Catherine wasn't going to acknowledge the problem or change her behavior voluntarily. If anything, his questions had put her on alert, made her more careful about concealing her true feelings rather than addressing them. Malcolm Price had built his business empire by recognizing when negotiation had reached its limits, when more decisive action became necessary. As he lay awake planning his next moves, he realized his marriage might require the same strategic thinking that had made him successful in the boardroom. Some conflicts couldn't be resolved through compromise. Sometimes protecting what mattered most required choices that would fundamentally change everything. Sunday morning found Malcolm sitting with Rosa in her small breakfast nook, sharing the simple meal that had become their weekly tradition. She'd prepared his father's favorite, scrambled eggs with sharp cheddar, thick-cut bacon, and buttermilk biscuits that could melt away any worry. Catherine had left early for a charity committee brunch. Claiming urgent planning responsibilities, Rosa moved more slowly these days, her arthritis making simple tasks challenging. But she insisted on cooking this one meal herself each week. Malcolm watched her hands, once strong enough to scrub floors all night, now trembling slightly as she buttered his biscuit and felt the weight of time's passage. "You know," Rosa said, settling into her chair with a soft sigh, "your daddy used to say that Sunday breakfast was when a man remembered what he was working for all week." Malcolm smiled, pulling out his father's watch from his vest pocket. The gold timepiece had been James Price's most valuable possession, a retirement gift from the construction company where he'd worked for 22 years. Malcolm carried it every day now, a tangible connection to lessons learned at a father's knee. "Tell me what he'd think about all this," Malcolm said, gesturing around the elegant breakfast room. Rosa's eyes grew distant, remembering. "He'd be proud, baby, but not of the fancy house or the money. He'd be proud that you still come sit with your mama on Sunday mornings, still ask for her opinion like it matters. It does matter. More than you know. Your daddy had strong feelings about respect," Rosa continued, her voice taking on the storytelling rhythm Malcolm remembered from childhood. "He used to tell me, 'Rosa, you can measure a man's character by how he treats folks who can't do nothing for him.'" Malcolm remembered those lessons, delivered during evening walks through their neighborhood when money was tight and hope seemed fragile. James Price had worked construction during Atlanta's growth boom of the 1980s, coming home exhausted but never too tired to teach his son about dignity and integrity. "He'd sit right where you're sitting," Rosa said, nodding toward Malcolm's chair, "and tell you about the men he worked with. Some would curse the coffee lady if she was slow, kick at stray dogs, complain about having to work alongside black men or immigrants. Those men, your daddy said, revealed their hearts through their cruelty." Malcolm could almost hear his father's voice, patient and measured. "Son, anybody can be nice to people who can help them climb higher. Real character shows when you're dealing with folks who need your help instead of folks you need help from." "He used to check his watch constantly," Malcolm said, running his thumb over the timepiece's worn face. "Always worried about being late, letting people down. That man never missed a day of work in 22 years, Rosa said with pride. "Even when he was feeling poorly, even when we couldn't afford the gas money to get there. He'd say, 'Rosa, my word is all I got to offer. If I can't be counted on, I ain't worth nothing.'" Malcolm remembered the morning his father collapsed at the job site, his heart finally giving out from years of stress and overwork. James Price had died at 38, leaving behind a widow, a 12-year-old son, and a reputation for absolute reliability. The construction company had paid for the funeral, his co-workers serving as pallbearers, because everyone who knew James Price respected the man he'd been. "After Daddy died," Malcolm said quietly, "you could have remarried. Could have found someone to help carry the load." Rosa shook her head firmly. "I had you to raise proper. That was my job, my responsibility. Besides, your daddy set the standard pretty high. Any man who wanted to be part of our family would have to measure up to James Price's example. You never even dated." "Oh, I had offers," Rosa smiled mischievously. "But most men don't want a woman with priorities they can't change. I made it clear from the beginning my son came first, always. That scared off the ones who weren't serious about family." Malcolm thought about his father's approach to marriage, the way James had treated Rosa like a precious gift rather than a convenience. Even working double shifts, exhausted and financially stressed, James had made time for small courtesies, flowers picked from construction sites, love notes left in Rosa's lunchbox, his insistence on holding her chair during their rare restaurant dinners. How did Daddy balance work and family? "I remember him being gone so much, but I also remember him being present for everything that mattered. Your daddy understood that providing for family wasn't just about money," Rosa explained. "He worked hard because he had to, but he made sure his work served the family instead of replacing it. Every overtime hour was for your college fund. Every weekend job was for a better neighborhood, better schools." Malcolm's business partner, David Chen, had called that morning asking about a potential merger that could double their company's value. The opportunity would require extensive travel, complex negotiations, and months of Malcolm's undivided attention. In his younger years, he wouldn't have hesitated. Now, sitting with Rosa, he found himself questioning whether success justified any cost. "Mama, Do you think I've balanced things right? Work and family? Rosa studied his face carefully, the way she used to when he was young, and wrestling with problems he couldn't articulate. You've built something amazing, Malcolm. Your daddy would be so proud of what you've accomplished. That's not what I asked. I know, she said softly. And I think you know the answer, or you wouldn't be asking the question. Malcolm looked around the breakfast nook, remembering how excited he'd been to design this space specifically for Rosa. He'd imagined years of Sunday morning conversations, holiday baking sessions, quiet moments that would anchor his success in family connection. The vision was becoming reality, but Catherine's attitude threatened to poison it. When you married Catherine, Rosa continued carefully, I was so happy for you. She was beautiful, educated, everything I dreamed you might find. But I wondered what? Whether she understood that when you marry Malcolm Price, you marry into the Price family. All of us, with all our history and traditions and ways of doing things. Malcolm's father had proposed to Rosa with a simple promise. I want to build a life with you that honors both our families. James had meant it, embracing Rosa's church, her cooking, her mother's old-fashioned ideas about child-rearing. He'd seen marriage as joining two histories, not replacing one with another. Catherine knew about my background when we met, Malcolm said. She said she admired my values, my commitment to family. People can admire something in theory while finding it inconvenient in practice, Rosa observed. Your daddy used to say that real love doesn't try to change what it claims to love. The wisdom hit Malcolm like a revelation. Catherine had fallen in love with his success story, the humble origins that made his achievement more impressive, the family loyalty that proved his character. But she wanted the story without the reality, the reputation without the responsibilities. Mama, are you happy here? Rosa's smile was sad but genuine. I'm happy anywhere you are, baby. But I'd be lying if I said this felt like home the way I hoped it would. What would make it feel like home? Feeling wanted instead of tolerated. Feeling like my presence adds something instead of just taking up space. Feeling like the woman you married understands that loving you means accepting where you came from. Malcolm reached across the table, covering Rosa's weathered hand with his own. The contrast struck him. Her hands bore the calluses and scars of a lifetime's hard work, while his were soft from years of corporate comfort. But they shared the same determined grip, the same steady strength that had carried their family through decades of challenges. You are wanted. Mama, don't ever doubt that. I know you want me here, Malcolm. The question is whether your wife does, and whether you're prepared to address that honestly. As they cleared the breakfast dishes together, Malcolm found himself thinking about his father's watch and the lessons it represented. Time was precious, finite, irreplaceable. Every moment spent in conflict or deception was a moment stolen from love and connection. James Price had lived only 38 years, but he'd filled them with purpose and dignity. He'd built something lasting, not wealth or property, but values that continued shaping his family decades after his death. Malcolm had inherited more than a timepiece. He'd inherited a responsibility to honor what his father had started. Looking at Rosa's hopeful but wary expression, Malcolm realized that his biggest decision wasn't about business success or social standing. It was about whether he would be the kind of man his father had raised him to be, regardless of what that choice might cost him. Malcolm returned from the office Wednesday evening to find Catherine waiting in his study, her posture rigid with barely controlled fury. Maria had approached him that morning with an uncomfortable revelation. Catherine had been questioning the staff about their conversations with Malcolm, specifically asking whether anyone had discussed Rosa's adjustment to living in the house. We need to talk, Catherine announced without preamble. Malcolm set down his briefcase carefully, noting that she'd positioned herself behind his desk like a prosecutor preparing for cross-examination. The family Bible sat open on the corner of the desk, Rosa's worn, leather-bound King James version that had guided their family through 3 generations of struggles and triumphs. Rosa read from it each night, finding comfort in verses underlined by Malcolm's grandmother and great-grandmother. Of course. What's on your mind? I know what you've been doing, Malcolm. Catherine's voice was cold, clipped, nothing like the warm southern charm she usually employed. Interrogating the staff, asking leading questions about me and your mother. Malcolm remained standing, his business instincts warning him that this confrontation would require every ounce of self-control he possessed. I've been concerned about Mama's happiness. I asked a few questions. You've been building a case against me, Catherine snapped, like I'm some kind of criminal in my own home. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have my own employees reporting my conversations to my husband? They're not reporting conversations, Catherine. They're sharing concerns about a family member who seems distressed. Catherine laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the usually peaceful study. Family member. Malcolm, your mother is a 73-year-old woman who's never lived anywhere nicer than a housing project. She doesn't understand our world, our responsibilities, our obligations. Our obligations include treating family with respect and dignity. Respect? Catherine's composure cracked completely. Malcolm, I've shown that woman more respect than she's ever received in her life. I've let her live in a house worth more than she's ever dreamed of. I've included her in social events where she clearly doesn't belong. I've tolerated her outdated opinions and backward ways of thinking. Malcolm felt his jaw tighten. Backward ways of thinking? Catherine gestured toward the open Bible dismissively. That's superstitious nonsense, for starters. Reading that book like it contains actual wisdom instead of ancient mythology. The way she talks about divine providence and God's plan, it's embarrassing, Malcolm. The attack on Rosa's faith crossed a line Malcolm hadn't expected Catherine to approach. Rosa's Christianity wasn't performative or judgmental. It was the quiet strength that had sustained her through widowhood, poverty, and discrimination. Her prayers had guided every major decision in Malcolm's life, and her faith community had provided the support system that made his success possible. My mother's faith is none of your concern. It is when she's living under my roof, influencing our social standing, representing our family to people who matter. Catherine's mask was dissolving entirely, revealing ugliness that took Malcolm's breath away. Do you know what Helen Morrison said at the club last week? She asked if we were running some kind of charity case. Having that old woman shuffling around at our dinner parties. Helen Morrison can go to hell. Helen Morrison's husband controls half the commercial real estate development in this city. Catherine exploded. Her opinion matters, Malcolm. These people's opinions matter. And your mother makes us look like we don't know our place in society. Our place? Malcolm's voice grew dangerously quiet. Catherine, what exactly do you think our place is? We're successful people, Malcolm. We've earned the right to associate with Atlanta's best families, to be included in circles that most people can only dream about. But that comes with expectations, standards that have to be maintained. Malcolm studied his wife's face, seeing clearly for the first time the calculations behind her public persona. And Rosa doesn't meet those standards? Look at her. Catherine gestured wildly, her careful composure completely abandoned. She shops at Walmart instead of Neiman Marcus. She thinks Olive Garden is fine dining. She talks about church bingo and prayer circles and treats that housekeeper like they're equals. She has no understanding of class, of propriety, of what's expected from people in our position. Each word hit Malcolm like a physical blow. Catherine wasn't just criticizing Rosa's lifestyle choices. She was attacking the woman who had sacrificed everything to give Malcolm opportunities Catherine now took for granted. That woman, Malcolm said carefully, worked 3 jobs to put me through college. She cleaned offices at night so I could have clothes that fit and textbooks that weren't torn. Everything I've accomplished started with her sacrifices, and you've repaid those sacrifices 1,000 times over. Catherine shot back. You've given her a life of luxury she never could have achieved on her own. But gratitude should include understanding boundaries, knowing when to step back and let you enjoy the fruits of your success. Malcolm moved closer to the desk, his hands clenched into fists. Let me enjoy them? Catherine, Rosa is the fruit of my success. Being able to take care of her, to give her comfort and security, that's what makes everything else worthwhile. That's exactly the problem, Catherine said, her voice growing colder. You still think like someone from that neighborhood, someone who owes something to people who held you back. Held me back. Malcolm's voice rose for the first time. Mama never held me back a single day in her life. She pushed me forward when I wanted to quit, believed in me when nobody else would, sacrificed her own happiness so I could chase my dreams. Catherine waved dismissively. I'm not talking about the past, Malcolm.
I'm talking about now.
About the future. About what kind of legacy you want to build and who you want to build it with. What are you saying? Catherine's next words shattered whatever remained of Malcolm's illusions about his marriage. I'm saying you need to choose, Malcolm. You can be the successful businessman who belongs in Atlanta's elite circles, or you can be the dutiful son who's dragged down by obligations to people who don't understand your world. But you can't be both. The ultimatum hung in the air like poison. Malcolm looked at the open Bible, remembering countless evenings when Rosa had read aloud from its pages, teaching him about integrity, compassion, and the importance of honoring your commitments. The verses she'd underlined over the years formed a roadmap for living with dignity and purpose. And if I choose my mother? Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. Then you'll find out exactly how much your precious family values are worth when your wife isn't around to maintain the social connections that have made your business so successful. You think those country club contracts and political connections just happened by accident. You think men like the governor and Senator Richardson invited you to their private events because they were impressed by your rags to riches story. The truth hit Malcolm like cold water. Catherine hadn't just married him for his wealth. She'd seen him as a project, someone whose success could be leveraged for her own social climbing. His business achievements had opened doors, but her family connections and social manipulation had kept them open. You've been using me. I've been building us, Catherine corrected. Building something bigger than either of us could achieve alone. But I can't keep building while you're tearing it down with misplaced loyalty to people who belong in your past, not your future. Malcolm picked up the Bible, feeling its familiar weight, remembering Rosa's voice reading from Proverbs. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Catherine, I want you to listen very carefully, Malcolm said, his voice steady despite the rage coursing through him. Rosa Price is my mother. She will be welcome in my home, at my table, in my life until the day she dies. If that's a problem for you, then we need to discuss what that means for our marriage. Catherine's expression shifted to something Malcolm had never seen before. Pure, undisguised contempt. Your marriage? Malcolm, you mean the marriage that's given you access to everything you have now? The marriage that transformed you from some nobody, from the projects, into someone who matters in this city. I was never nobody, Malcolm replied quietly. I was Rosa Price's son. That's always been enough. Catherine's facade cracked completely, revealing the ugliness beneath her polished exterior. That's exactly your problem, Malcolm. You still think being Rosa Price's son means something to people who matter. But let me tell you what they really see when they look at you. They see someone who got lucky, someone who's still one generation away from food stamps and government housing. And every time your mother opens her mouth, she reminds them exactly where you came from. The words hung between them like a declaration of war. Malcolm realized he was looking at a stranger, someone who had been living in his house, sharing his bed, planning his social calendar while harboring this level of contempt for everything he valued. Get out, he said quietly. What? Get out of my study. Get out of my sight. And stay away from my mother. Catherine's expression shifted to shock, then calculation. Malcolm, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. We can work through this if you just get out, Malcolm repeated, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire. Now! Catherine stared at him for a long moment, perhaps finally recognizing that she had pushed too far, revealed too much. When she turned and walked toward the door, Malcolm noticed she didn't take the Bible with her. The book she'd called superstitious nonsense, the foundation of values she'd spent their entire marriage trying to undermine. As the door closed behind her, Malcolm sank into his chair and opened the Bible to Rosa's favorite passage, the one she'd read to him countless times during his childhood. Train up a child in the way he should go, And when he is old, he will not depart from it. Rosa had trained him in love, sacrifice, and integrity. Catherine had tried to retrain him in calculation, image management, and selective loyalty. The war between those two philosophies was finally out in the open, and Malcolm knew there could be only one winner. The manila folder arrived at Malcolm's office the next morning, delivered personally by Rebecca Santos, the private investigator he'd contacted after Catherine's explosive revelation. Rebecca had built her reputation handling delicate matters for Atlanta's business elite, corporate espionage, background checks, marital investigations that required absolute discretion. "Mr. Price," Rebecca said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You're not going to like what I found." Malcolm had commissioned the investigation reluctantly, hoping to find evidence that would help him understand Catherine's behavior, perhaps discover external pressures or influences that might explain her cruelty toward Rosa. Instead, the folder Rebecca placed before him contained revelations that recontextualized his entire marriage. "Tell me," Malcolm said quietly. Rebecca opened the folder, revealing photographs, financial records, and detailed timelines that painted a disturbing picture. "Your wife isn't who you think she is. Mr. Price, Catherine Morrison, that's her maiden name, has a history of targeting successful men from humble backgrounds." The first photograph showed Catherine at a charity gala in Charleston, her arm linked with a man Malcolm didn't recognize. The timestamp indicated it was taken 6 months before Malcolm met her. "Robert Hendricks," Rebecca explained. "Self-made millionaire, construction company owner, parents were textile workers. Catherine dated him for 2 years, got engaged, then broke it off when she discovered his business was leveraged beyond his assets." More photographs followed. Catherine with different men at various social events. Always the same type, successful, wealthy, but not from established families. Each relationship had followed a similar pattern of courtship, integration into social circles, then strategic withdrawal. "She's a professional social climber," Rebecca continued. "Her family has connections but no real wealth. Her father went bankrupt 20 years ago, lost the family estate to creditors. Catherine learned early that marrying money was easier than earning it. But she also learned to choose carefully." Malcolm studied a photograph of Catherine dancing with another man, her smile radiant and genuine in a way he hadn't seen in years. "Who is this?" "Bradley Whitman, old Atlanta family, trust fund, never worked a day in his life." Catherine maintained a relationship with him throughout most of her other involvements. "They're still seeing each other." The words hit Malcolm like a physical blow. "Still?" 3 days ago, Rebecca said, sliding a surveillance photograph across the desk. It showed Catherine and Bradley embracing in the parking garage of an upscale downtown hotel. "They meet regularly when you're traveling. Hotel records show they've maintained this pattern for the past 4 years. Malcolm's hands trembled as he examined the evidence of his wife's betrayal. 4 years of deception. 4 years of lies while she slept beside him, planned their social calendar, and slowly poisoned his relationship with his mother. "There's more," Rebecca said gently. "Financial records show Catherine has been systematically moving assets into accounts Bradley controls. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger your accountant's attention individually, but substantial when combined. A spreadsheet detailed the transfers, charity donations that were actually payments to organizations Bradley controlled, art purchases from galleries he owned, investment opportunities that funneled money into his business ventures. Catherine had been embezzling from their joint accounts for years, building a financial foundation for her eventual exit from their marriage. How much? Approximately $2.7 million over the past 3 years. All technically legal since you have joint account access, but clearly intended to deceive." Malcolm set down the photographs, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of Catherine's deception. Their entire marriage had been built on lies, not just infidelity, but a systematic plan to extract wealth and social position before disappearing into the arms of her true love. Why me? Why not just marry Bradley from the beginning? Rebecca consulted her notes. "Bradley's trust fund comes with restrictions. He can't access the principal until he's 40, and even then, there are conduct clauses that could limit his inheritance. His family disapproves of his lifestyle. Catherine needed someone else's money to tide them over until Bradley's situation improved, and someone from my background would be easier to manipulate. According to sources who knew her in Charleston, Catherine specifically targeted self-made men because she believed they'd be more grateful for her social connections, more willing to overlook personality flaws in exchange for acceptance into elite circles. Malcolm thought about their early relationship, how flattered he'd been by Catherine's attention, how eager he'd been to prove himself worthy of her refined background. She'd played perfectly into his insecurities, making him feel sophisticated while actually viewing him as a mark. The timeline suggests she originally planned to divorce you after 3 years, Rebecca continued. Long enough to establish social connections and accumulate assets, short enough to avoid complicated property settlements. But your business success exceeded her expectations. She decided to extend the timeline. What changed? Your mother moving in permanently. Catherine saw Rosa as a threat to her long-term plans. The staff interviews I conducted suggest Catherine was actively trying to drive Rosa away to eliminate potential complications when she eventually filed for divorce. Malcolm's rage at Catherine's cruelty toward Rosa now made perfect sense. Rosa wasn't just an inconvenience to Catherine's social aspirations, she was an obstacle to Catherine's exit strategy. A beloved family member would complicate divorce proceedings, potentially influencing settlement negotiations and custody arrangements if children had been involved. She was setting up a narrative, Malcolm realized, making it look like Mama was the problem, that our marriage failed because I chose my difficult mother over my reasonable wife. Exactly. Court records from her previous relationships show similar patterns. Catherine positions herself as the long-suffering spouse dealing with unreasonable family obligations, then uses that narrative to justify her requests for substantial settlements. Rebecca pulled out another set of documents, legal papers prepared by Catherine's attorney, divorce documents that had been drafted but not filed. The terms were staggering. Catherine wanted half of all assets, including the house, ongoing alimony payments, and a non-disclosure agreement preventing Malcolm from discussing their marriage publicly. She's been ready to file these for 6 months, Rebecca explained, waiting for the right moment, probably planning to claim you chose your mother over your marriage. She's documented every argument, every instance where you prioritized Rosa's needs over her convenience. Malcolm studied the divorce papers, recognizing Catherine's strategic mind in every clause and provision. She'd been planning this war while he'd been trying to save their marriage, building her case while he'd been attempting compromise and understanding. There's one more thing, Rebecca said hesitantly. Something you need to know about her conversations with Rosa. More transcripts emerged from the folder, recordings obtained through security cameras Malcolm didn't know his staff had access to. Catherine's voice was clear and cruel, her attacks on Rosa methodical and devastating. She's been systematically destroying your mother's self-worth, Rebecca explained, convincing Rosa that she's a burden, that her presence is damaging your marriage, that the best thing she could do for your happiness is disappear from your life. Malcolm read through the transcripts, watching Catherine's psychological warfare laid out in black and white. Every conversation had been calculated to make Rosa feel unwanted, unloved, responsible for problems that didn't exist until Catherine created them. Your mother has been protecting you, Rebecca continued. She never told you about the worst conversations because Catherine convinced her that complaining would only confirm she was. Too much trouble to keep around, the revelation broke. Something inside Malcolm's chest. Rosa had been enduring Catherine's cruelty in silence, absorbing the poison to protect her son's marriage, sacrificing her own happiness rather than cause him pain. The woman who had given him everything was still giving, still protecting, still putting his welfare above her own. Mr. Price, Rebecca said softly. Catherine Whitman, that's her real name now. She's been using Bradley's surname in private correspondence, never loved you. This was always a business arrangement for her. She saw an opportunity and took it, planning to cash out when the timing was right. Malcolm closed the folder, his hands steady, despite the emotional earthquake reshaping his understanding of the past 12 years. Catherine hadn't just betrayed their marriage vows. She'd constructed an elaborate fiction, a performance so convincing that he'd built his life around someone who had never actually existed. What do you recommend? Rebecca's expression grew serious. Document everything. Protect your assets immediately. And Mr. Price, don't confront her until you're ready for war. Catherine Whitman is a professional at this. She'll have contingency plans, backup strategies, ways to salvage her situation, even if she knows you've discovered her game. Malcolm thought about Rosa sitting in her chair that morning, reading her Bible with tears in her eyes, carrying the weight of Catherine's cruelty alone. His mother had recognized Catherine's true nature long before he had, but she'd loved him too much to destroy his illusions without absolute proof. The woman he'd married had never existed. The woman he'd been living with was a stranger who'd spent 4 years dismantling his family while planning her escape. But Rosa had been exactly who she'd always appeared to be, a mother who loved her son unconditionally, even when that love required unbearable sacrifice. Catherine had made a fatal miscalculation. She'd assumed Malcolm's loyalty to family was weakness, that his respect for Rosa was sentimentality that could be manipulated and overcome. She'd never understood that these weren't flaws in his character. They were the foundation of his strength. The war Catherine had been planning was about to begin, but she'd been preparing to fight the wrong enemy. Malcolm Price hadn't built his empire by being naive or sentimental. He'd built it by being strategic, ruthless when necessary, and absolutely committed to protecting what mattered most. Catherine Whitman was about to discover exactly what kind of man she'd been trying to destroy. Malcolm spent the following week orchestrating his response with the same methodical precision he'd applied to his most complex business deals. Catherine's betrayal had revealed the depth of her strategic thinking, but it had also exposed her greatest weakness. She'd underestimated him completely. His first call went to Thomas Brennan, the most respected family law attorney in Georgia. Thomas had handled divorces for half of Atlanta's business elite, earning a reputation for protecting his clients' interests while maintaining absolute discretion. They met at Thomas's private office on a Saturday morning, away from curious eyes and potential leaks. "Malcolm, I've reviewed the materials your investigator provided," Thomas said, spreading documents across his mahogany conference table. "This is one of the most calculated cases of marital fraud I've encountered. Your wife has essentially been conducting a long-term con operation. The legal documents Thomas had prepared formed a comprehensive defense strategy. Prenuptial agreement modifications, asset protection orders, injunctions preventing Catherine from accessing joint accounts, each document designed to neutralize her carefully laid plans. The key is timing," Thomas explained. "Catherine believes she controls the narrative and the timeline. We're going to remove both advantages simultaneously." Malcolm studied the restraining orders that would freeze Catherine's access to their shared assets. "What about the money she's already moved?" "Recoverable, given the pattern of deception. We can prove fraudulent transfer, especially with the evidence showing her relationship with Bradley Whitman preceded and continued throughout your marriage. Courts don't look kindly on spouses who embezzle marital assets to fund affairs." Next, Malcolm met with David Chen, his business partner and closest friend in the corporate world. David had built his own technology empire from nothing, understanding both the challenges of success and the importance of protecting what you'd earned. "Jesus. Malcolm," David said after reviewing a summary of the situation, "how long has this been going on?" "According to the evidence from the beginning, our entire marriage was her exit strategy." David's expression hardened. "What do you need from me?" Malcolm appreciated David's immediate offer of support without judgment or lengthy discussions about the complexities of marriage. Legal backup, character witnesses if needed, and help protecting the business interests. Catherine has been using our social connections for her schemes. I need to know which relationships are legitimate and which ones exist because of her manipulation. Consider it done. I'll contact our mutual business associates discreetly. Let them know there might be some personal changes coming that won't affect professional relationships. Malcolm's next priority was protecting Rosa, both emotionally and practically. He met with Dr. Patricia Williams, Rosa's physician, to discuss the health impacts of the stress Rosa had been enduring. "Your mother's blood pressure has been elevated for months," Dr. Williams reported. "She attributes it to normal aging, but the symptoms suggest chronic stress rather than purely physical causes. She's been dealing with emotional abuse in my home," Malcolm said quietly. "I'm working to resolve the situation, but I want to make sure she has the medical support she needs." Dr. Williams prescribed medication to help manage Rosa's blood pressure while recommending counseling to address the psychological impact of Catherine's treatment. Malcolm arranged for a therapist who specialized in elder abuse to meet with Rosa privately, ensuring his mother had professional support for processing her experiences. The household staff required delicate handling. These people had witnessed Catherine's behavior, but Malcolm needed their testimony without creating an atmosphere of suspicion and surveillance in his own home. "Mr. Price," Maria said when he spoke with her privately, "we all knew something wasn't right. Mrs. Catherine, she was different when you weren't here, but we didn't know how to tell you without causing problems. You're not in trouble. Maria, I need to know everything you've observed, but I also need to know you're comfortable providing that information if it becomes necessary for legal proceedings." Maria nodded firmly. "Mrs. Rosa, she's good people. If Mrs. Catherine hurt her, that's not right. We'll tell the truth about what we saw." James, the groundskeeper, and Thomas, the security guard, provided similar assurances. Catherine's cruelty had been witnessed by people who respected Rosa and felt guilty about their inability to intervene directly. Malcolm's most difficult conversation was with Henry Morrison, his mentor, whose wife Helen had been among Catherine's social circle. Henry listened without interruption as Malcolm explained the situation, his weathered face growing more serious with each revelation. "Son, I'm ashamed," Henry said finally. "Helen mentioned some concerns about your family dynamics, but I attributed that to social gossip. I should have recognized the signs of a woman working to isolate you from your support system. Did Catherine ever approach you about business matters? Anything that seemed unusual?" Henry's expression darkened. "She asked about your company's valuation several times, always framing it as wanting to understand your success better. She also inquired about prenuptial agreements, claiming she was advising a friend. I thought she was just being supportive. The pattern was becoming clearer. Catherine had been gathering intelligence about Malcolm's wealth and legal vulnerabilities throughout their marriage, preparing for eventual litigation while maintaining her performance as devoted wife. Malcolm arranged a private meeting with Father Miguel Santos, Rosa's longtime priest and spiritual advisor. Father Miguel had known Rosa for 20 years, providing comfort during her most difficult periods and guidance during major life decisions. "Malcolm, your mother came to me 3 weeks ago," Father Miguel said. "She was deeply troubled, questioning whether God was punishing her for being prideful about your success." Prideful. She'd been told that her presence in your home was causing problems in your marriage, that her happiness about your achievements was actually selfishness disguised as maternal love. Someone had convinced her that the best thing she could do for your spiritual welfare was remove herself from your life. Malcolm's anger at Catherine's manipulation intensified. She hadn't just attacked Rosa's sense of belonging, she'd weaponized Rosa's faith, turning her deepest spiritual convictions into tools of self-doubt and isolation. "I assured her that taking pride in her son's character was not sinful," Father Miguel continued. "But she's been carrying tremendous guilt, believing she's failed as a mother by becoming a burden to your family. She's never been a burden. She's the reason I have a family worth protecting," Father Miguel nodded knowingly. "That's what I told her. But faith can be vulnerable to manipulation when it's sincere." Your mother's love for you made her susceptible to suggestions that sacrificing her own happiness was the right thing to do. The conversation reinforced Malcolm's determination to ensure Rosa never again questioned her value or place in his life. Catherine's psychological warfare had targeted Rosa's greatest strength, her selfless love, and turned it into a weapon against her own well-being. As the week progressed, Malcolm maintained his normal routine while secretly positioning every piece of his counterattack. Catherine seemed unaware that anything had changed, continuing her social schedule and maintaining her performance as concerned wife, dealing with difficult family dynamics. She made one crucial mistake that revealed the extent of her desperation. Malcolm's security system, upgraded the previous year for general protection, had captured audio recordings of Catherine's phone conversations with Bradley Whitman. The recordings revealed not just their affair, but their detailed plans for Catherine's exit strategy. "The old woman's getting suspicious," Catherine said in one conversation. "She keeps asking Malcolm about my attitude, trying to cause problems between us." "I need to accelerate the timeline." Bradley's response was equally damning. "Just file the papers, Catherine. You've extracted enough to keep us comfortable until my trust fund kicks in." "Why drag this out?" "Because I want everything I'm entitled to," Catherine replied. "Malcolm built that company using connections I provided. I've earned my share of what we created together. The recordings would be admissible in court, providing undeniable proof of Catherine's intentions and motivations. But more importantly, they revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of what she was fighting for. Catherine thought she was entitled to half of Malcolm's material wealth. She didn't understand that she was actually fighting for something she could never claim or comprehend: a man's love for his family, built on sacrifice, respect, and genuine connection. On Friday evening, Malcolm sat in his study reviewing the legal documents that would end his marriage and protect his mother. The papers represented justice, but they also represented the death of illusions he'd cherished for 12 years. Rosa knocked softly on his door, entering with the tentative movements of someone who'd learned to expect rejection. "Malcolm, honey, I wanted to talk to you about something." He gestured for her to sit, dreading whatever new manipulation Catherine had imposed on his mother during his absence. "I've been thinking about maybe finding my own place," Rosa said quietly. "Somewhere closer to the church, maybe one of those nice senior communities. I don't want to be the reason you and Catherine are having problems." Malcolm looked at his mother, the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his success, who'd endured months of psychological abuse to protect his marriage, who was now offering to sacrifice her own security rather than cause him conflict. "Mama," Malcolm said gently, "what if I told you that Catherine won't be living here much longer?" Rosa's eyes widened with concern. "Malcolm, you can't make decisions about your marriage because of me. I won't be responsible for breaking up your family." "You're not breaking up anything, Mama. Catherine did that herself, long before you moved in here." Malcolm made his decision in that moment. He'd been planning to confront Catherine privately, give her the opportunity to leave with some dignity intact. But Rosa deserved to know the truth, deserved to understand that her suffering hadn't been necessary or inevitable. "There are some things about Catherine that I need to tell you," Malcolm said. "Things that explain why she's been treating you the way she has." For the first time in months, Rosa's face showed hope instead of resignation. "What things?" Malcolm opened the folder containing Rebecca's investigation. "The truth about who Catherine really is, and what she's been planning all along." The final phase of Malcolm's counterattack was about to begin. But first, his mother deserved to know that her love had been real, even when everything else had been a lie. Catherine entered Malcolm's study Monday morning with her usual confident stride, coffee in hand, ready to discuss their weekend social schedule. She'd spent Sunday at a charity luncheon, performing her role as devoted wife and community leader, while Malcolm stayed home with Rosa. "The Hendersons' dinner party is this Friday," Catherine began, settling into her chair across from his desk. "We should confirm our attendance, and I thought Rosa might enjoy an evening out." There's a nice little restaurant near the church she likes. Malcolm studied his wife's face, marveling at her ability to maintain the performance even after their explosive confrontation the previous week. She'd crafted the perfect suggestion, appearing considerate of Rosa while actually removing her from the house during an important social event. Actually, Catherine, I have something more pressing to discuss. He activated the large monitor mounted on his study wall, the screen illuminating with security camera footage from their living room. Catherine's expression shifted from casual interest to wariness as she recognized the scene. What is this? Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks ago, Malcolm replied calmly. You remember the day you told Rosa she was pathetic for waiting by the phone when I called. Catherine's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips as her own voice filled the room. Sharp and cruel. You sit in that chair all day, waiting for him to call, making sure everyone knows how much you sacrifice for this family. It's pathetic. The color drained from Catherine's face as she watched herself pace around Rosa like a predator, her elegant frame rigid with contempt. On screen, Rosa gripped her cane defensively while Catherine launched her systematic attack. Malcolm, I can explain. Please don't interrupt, Malcolm said quietly, his voice carrying the same controlled authority he used in hostile business negotiations. I want you to see all of it. More footage played, different days, different conversations, but the same pattern of cruelty. Catherine dismissing Rosa's stories about church, mocking her simple tastes, systematically undermining her sense of belonging and worth. The recordings captured not just the words, but Catherine's expressions, calculating, contemptuous, completely unlike the warm persona she displayed for Malcolm's benefit. This isn't what it looks like, Catherine said, her voice losing its usual confidence. Your mother can be difficult, and sometimes I get frustrated. Malcolm pressed another button, and Catherine's voice emerged from the speakers with crystalline clarity. When he was little, after his daddy died, Malcolm used to have nightmares. That's Rosa speaking, Malcolm observed. This is you responding. Catherine's recorded voice cut through Rosa's vulnerable sharing like a blade. Well, he's not a scared little boy anymore. Rosa, he's a grown man with responsibilities that extend far beyond your emotional needs. Catherine stared at the screen, watching herself tower over Malcolm's mother while delivering her calculated cruelty. Her performance mask was slipping, revealing the panic beneath her composed exterior. Malcolm, you have to understand the pressure I've been under. Managing our social obligations, maintaining our reputation, dealing with the complications of having complications? Malcolm's voice remained dangerously calm. Is that what you call my mother? He switched to new footage, Catherine on the phone in their bedroom, unaware of the security system's audio capabilities. Her conversation with Bradley Whitman played clearly through the speakers. The old woman's getting suspicious. She keeps asking Malcolm about my attitude, trying to cause problems between us. I need to accelerate the timeline. Catherine's face went completely white as Bradley's voice responded, Just file the papers, Catherine. You've extracted enough to keep us comfortable until my trust fund kicks in, because I want everything I'm entitled to. Malcolm built that company using connections I provided. I've earned my share of what we created together. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the monitor. Catherine stared at the screen, as if hypnotized, watching her carefully constructed world collapse in real time. 12 years, Malcolm said quietly. 12 years of marriage, and it was all a performance. Catherine's composure cracked completely. Malcolm, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You married me for my money, maintained a relationship with Bradley throughout our marriage, systematically abused my mother to drive her away, and embezzled nearly $3 million to fund your exit strategy. You were spying on me. Catherine's voice rose to a near shriek, recording private conversations, investigating me like some kind of criminal. I was protecting my family from someone who was systematically destroying it. Catherine stood abruptly, pacing toward the window with quick, agitated steps. Malcolm, you don't understand. Everything I did was for us. The social connections, the strategic relationships. I built the foundation that made your success possible. You built nothing, Malcolm replied. You manipulated existing relationships for personal gain while planning to cash out when it suited your purposes. Catherine whirled around, her mask completely abandoned. You think you would have achieved any of this without me? You think Governor Richardson would have invited some nobody from the projects to his private dinners? You think Senator Mills would have fast-tracked your construction permits based on your charming personality? I think I built my business on integrity and quality work. The social connections were nice, but they weren't the foundation. They were everything. Catherine exploded. Do you have any idea how much effort it took to make you acceptable to people who matter? How many conversations I had to navigate? How many social landmines I had to diffuse because you still acted like someone grateful just to be in the room? Malcolm watched his wife reveal her true feelings about him, about their marriage, about everything they'd supposedly built together. Catherine hadn't been his partner. She'd been his handler, managing his image while viewing him with the same contempt she'd shown Rosa. And now? Malcolm asked, what happens now that I know the truth? Catherine's expression shifted through multiple calculations, searching for an angle that might salvage her situation. Now we deal with reality, Malcolm. You need me more than you want to admit. Without my connections, without my social positioning, you'll find out exactly how quickly Atlanta's elite circles can close their doors. Is that a threat? Catherine's smile was sharp and ugly. It's a fact. You can destroy our marriage, but you can't destroy what I've built for your career. And you certainly can't give your precious mother the kind of life she's grown accustomed to if your business reputation suffers. Malcolm looked at his wife, really looked at her, seeing clearly for the first time the calculating stranger he'd been living with for over a decade. Catherine's final play was to threaten Rosa's security, using his mother's welfare as leverage to maintain her position. Catherine, Malcolm said quietly, you've made a fundamental error in judgment. What's that? You assumed I built my success on your connections rather than my own merit. You assumed I needed your social positioning more than I valued my family's well-being. And you assumed I wouldn't be willing to sacrifice material wealth to protect what actually matters. Catherine's confident expression began to waver as Malcolm's words sank in. She'd spent years studying his weaknesses, manipulating his insecurities, but she'd never understood his greatest strength. Malcolm Price would always choose love over money, family over status, integrity over convenience. Catherine had never recognized these as strengths because she'd never possessed them herself. The war she'd been planning was about to enter its final phase. But she was finally beginning to realize she'd been fighting the wrong battle all along. Malcolm opened the leather portfolio that had been sitting on his desk throughout their conversation, revealing the divorce papers Thomas Brennan had prepared. Catherine's eyes widened as she recognized the official legal documents, her carefully constructed exit strategy crumbling before her eyes. You've already filed. Catherine's voice carried the first genuine emotion Malcolm had heard from her in years, fear, this morning. Along with restraining orders freezing your access to all joint accounts, asset protection measures, and a comprehensive fraud case regarding the money you've transferred to Bradley. Catherine sank into her chair, the enormity of her situation finally penetrating her calculations. She'd spent months preparing her own divorce strategy, but Malcolm had outmaneuvered her completely. The prenuptial agreement you signed limits your claim to marital assets, Malcolm continued calmly. Given the evidence of adultery and financial fraud, even that limited claim is now void. You'll leave with whatever personal belongings you brought into this marriage. You can't prove adultery, Catherine said desperately. Private investigators can't. Malcolm activated the monitor again, showing footage of Catherine and Bradley embracing in the hotel parking garage. This is from last Thursday. Hotel records show you've been meeting regularly for 4 years. Phone records document thousands of calls and text messages. Financial records trace money you've transferred to accounts he controls. Catherine's face crumpled as the reality of her situation sank in. Malcolm, please. We can work through this. I made mistakes, but our marriage doesn't have to end. Our marriage ended the day you decided Rosa was an obstacle to your plans instead of a blessing to our family. She was never going to accept me. Catherine exploded, her composure finally shattering completely. She was always watching, always judging, always making me feel like I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She was protecting me from someone she recognized as dangerous long before I did. Catherine's desperation shifted to rage as her manipulation tactics failed. You're choosing that old woman over your own wife? Over everything we've built together? I'm choosing the person who actually loves me over someone who's been systematically destroying my family while planning to rob me blind. Malcolm pressed an intercom button. James, please come to my study. The groundskeeper appeared within moments, his expression respectfully neutral despite the obvious tension in the room. James will help you pack your personal belongings, Malcolm said to Catherine. You have 2 hours to collect what's yours and leave the property. 2 hours. Catherine's voice reached a near shriek. This is my home too. I have rights. You forfeited those rights when you committed adultery and fraud. The restraining order requires you to vacate the premises immediately. James will ensure you only take items that belong to you before our marriage. Catherine looked around the study wildly, perhaps hoping to find some leverage she'd overlooked. Her eyes settled on the family Bible, sitting open on Malcolm's desk. What about your reputation? She demanded. What about your business relationships? Do you think Senator Richardson will keep taking your calls when he finds out you divorced your wife for being mean to your mother? Malcolm's expression didn't change. Catherine, you still don't understand. Senator Richardson has been a friend of Henry Morrison for 30 years. Henry called him yesterday to explain the situation. The senator expressed his sympathy and assured me that anyone who would abuse an elderly woman deserves whatever consequences. Catherine's last weapon, her social connections, had been neutralized by Malcolm's careful preparation. The people she'd cultivated weren't loyal to her. They were impressed by Malcolm's success and disgusted by her behavior once they learned the truth. James, Malcolm said quietly. Please escort Mrs. Price upstairs to pack her belongings. Catherine stood unsteadily, her carefully maintained poise completely shattered. This isn't over, Malcolm. I know things about your business, about your clients, about deals that weren't completely legitimate. I can destroy you. You can try, Malcolm replied calmly. But my lawyers are very good, and all of my business dealings have been thoroughly documented and legally reviewed. Your threats are meaningless. Catherine started toward the door, then turned back with one final desperate attempt at manipulation. What about love, Malcolm? What about the good times we shared? Doesn't 12 years of marriage mean anything to you? Malcolm looked at his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, with something approaching pity. Catherine, love doesn't try to destroy what it claims to cherish. Love doesn't manipulate or deceive or abuse the vulnerable. What we shared was never love. It was a performance that fooled only me. After Catherine left with James, Malcolm sat alone in his study, the divorce papers before him representing both an ending and a beginning. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, as if an oppressive weight had been lifted from its elegant rooms. Rosa appeared in the doorway, moving carefully with her cane, but no longer radiating the defeated posture that had broken Malcolm's heart for months. Is it over? She asked quietly. It's over, Mama. Rosa entered the study fully, settling into the chair Catherine had vacated. I'm sorry it came to this, Malcolm. I know you loved her. Malcolm considered his mother's words carefully. I loved who I thought she was. The woman I married never actually existed, but the man who married her did exist, Rosa said gently. The man who wanted to build a family, who believed in love and commitment and doing right by people. That man is still here. Malcolm looked at his mother, the woman whose sacrifices had made his success possible, whose love had remained constant through every trial, whose dignity had withstood Catherine's systematic assault. That man learned something important, Malcolm replied. He learned that some people show you who they really are when they think nobody's watching. And he learned that real love protects what it values instead of destroying it. Rosa reached across the desk, covering Malcolm's hand with her own weathered palm. "Your daddy would be proud of the man you became today." Malcolm squeezed his mother's hand, feeling the calluses earned through decades of hard work, the strength that had held their family together through impossible circumstances. "We're going to be okay." "Mama, better than okay," Rosa smiled, the genuine warmth returning to her eyes for the first time in months. "We're going to be free." Through the study windows, Malcolm watched Catherine's car disappear down their circular driveway, carrying away the lies that had nearly destroyed his family. The house that had felt like a battlefield for months was transforming back into a home, a place where love was real, respect was mutual, and family meant something more than convenient appearances. The war was over. Malcolm and Rosa had won something more valuable than money or social position. They'd won the right to live authentically, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their welfare. For the first time in years, Malcolm Price felt completely at peace.